When we talk about science, the word itself carries a kind of sacred authority.
The main thing in your life was science.
Most people believe that science is the arbiter of truth and falsehood, that it operates in a vacuum of rationality, untouched by politics, bias, and human prejudice. But science, like everything else, is a product of human minds that are shaped by their cultures, their biases. When we talk about women in science today, we frame the conversation as one of barriers that women had to overcome, as if the real issue was access. But this mini documentary is not just about who was let in.
Famed Madame Curie of France opens the way with experiments and discovery.
This is about how science itself was built. Science is a methodology, a way of structuring knowledge, but knowledge is not neutral. What we choose to study, how we interpret data, what we consider rational or valid, these are all shaped by the people who control the field. And for most of history, those people were men. This is why, for centuries, the study of biology, psychology, and medicine produced deeply misogynistic conclusions. Not because the data demanded it, but because the scientists assumed it was true before they even began their work. Medieval medicine also understood the female body as an imperfect version of the male one. Even later, some anatomists depicted female skeletons with weaker bones and smaller skulls to justify perceived intellectual and physical inferiority.
Typical female structure. Underdeveloped for arts and sciences, but stronger for religion and care of children.
In 1871, Charles Darwin published The Descent of Man, in which he argued that men had evolved superior intellectual capacities, while women were naturally predisposed for nurturing and passivity. He wrote,
"The chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than woman can attain."
In 1893, Italian criminologist Cesare Lombroso published The Female Offender, arguing that criminal women were biologically deviant. He claimed that unnatural women, those who resisted traditional roles, exhibited atavistic traits, making them closer to primitive humans. In the early 20th century, Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory of penis envy positioned women's psychological development as defined by a sense of anatomical deficiency. Freud argued that women, by virtue of their biology, were destined for passivity and moral inferiority. And this is not where it ends. Even scientific language can be sexist, which at times devalues female biological processes. Following an analysis by Emily Martin,
an illustration in a widely used medical text shows menstruation as a chaotic disintegration of form, complementing the many texts that describe it as ceasing, dying, losing, denuding, expelling. It is surely no accident that the remarkable process of making sperm involves precisely what, in the medical view, menstruation does not: production of something deemed valuable.
What is the bearing of the laws of heredity upon human affairs? Eugenics provides the answer.
The eugenics movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, rooted in scientific racism and gender oppression, promoted sterilization policies. In the US, thousands of black, indigenous, and poor women were forcibly sterilized under the guise of racial improvement.
That the state of Virginia sterilized thousands of persons between 1922 and 72 in a program aimed at ridding the state of so-called misfits.
Pseudoscientific theories like phrenology and biological determinism classified black and indigenous women as less evolved. This was a way to justify colonial violence, as seen in the exploitation of Sarah Bertman and the unethical experiments on enslaved women performed by J. Marion Sims. Now we shall look into the Matilda Effect, the exclusion and erasure of women's contribution. History is filled with the cases of women in science who face systemic discrimination within their fields. Their contributions often ignored, undervalued, or misattributed to male colleagues. From Rosalind Franklin, whose role in discovering DNA structure was overshadowed, to Lise Meitner, who was excluded from the Nobel Prize for her work on nuclear fission. The pattern of erasure is global. In India, Dr. Janaki Ammal's groundbreaking work in botany was marginalized due to caste and gender biases, while in China, Chen Xiongwu's critical experiments on parity violation were overlooked by the Nobel Committee. In Iran, Maryam Mirzakhani, the first woman to win the Fields Medal, faced institutional barriers in a male-dominated field. And in Japan, Toshiko Yuasa had to leave her country to pursue physics due to gender exclusion. Similarly, in Turkey, Professor Dilhan Eriyot's contribution to astrophysics were met with gender discrimination within academic institutions. These stories are not isolated, but part of a broader historical trend. Women were barred from universities and scientific institutions until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with organizations like the Royal Society and the French Academy of Sciences systematically excluding them. The witch hunts in Europe, as argued by Federici in Caliban and the Witch, targeted midwives and healers to dismantle female-centered knowledge systems, while another book, Witches, Midwives and Nurses, highlight how this suppression paved the way for male-dominated medicine. In India, British colonial policies excluded women from Western-style medical education, despite their centuries-long practice of Ayurveda and Unani medicine.
Madame Curie.
Even prominent figures like Marie Curie faced gender-based barriers, while trailblazers such as Amélie du Châtelet and Laura Bassi were denied full recognition for their groundbreaking contributions. Women were barred from astronaut training until the 1980s, despite being qualified. Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, was treated as an anomaly. Even Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, faced absurd questions from NASA engineers, like whether she needed 100 tampons for a one-week mission. Even in the modern era, women in academia and STEM fields continue to face implicit bias, systemic exclusion, and the infamous leaky pipeline phenomena, where women drop out at higher rates as they progress in their careers.
Researchers have attributed this to, again, the lack of female role models and mentors available for women throughout their academic careers, which leads to lower self-confidence in women doctoral students and less job security in comparison to male peers.
For most of history, medical research treated the male body as the standard, leading to dangerous gaps in women's healthcare. Until the 1990s, clinical trials largely excluded women, resulting in misdiagnosis and ineffective treatments. The history of medicine is filled with examples of systemic neglect and bias towards women's health, often with devastating consequences. The thalidomide crisis of the 1950s and 60s exposed the dangers of inadequate pharmaceutical testing, as the drug prescribed for morning sickness caused severe birth defects. And even today, many medical conditions remain underfunded and poorly understood, with women often dismissed or misdiagnosed.
Research looking at exercise physiology found just 6% of studies included female-only participant groups.
This shows how women's health has been an afterthought in medical research.
Our fundamental knowledge of the human body, as we know it today, is mostly inferred from what we know of the male body.
The irony is that when women actually do experience different medical effects, these same scientists blame biology, saying women are simply too complicated to study properly.
Typically, women are under-enrolled in the trials, and therefore the results of those trials may not be as applicable to women as they are to men.
Editorial in the British Journal of Sports Medicine says women continue to be excluded from meaningful research because of the complex shift in hormone levels during the menstrual cycle.
And it's not just medicine, engineering, or physics, even artificial intelligence. The modern AI systems, which are trained on data, inherit the same biases of the past. Voice recognition software struggled with female voices because it was trained on male speech patterns. Hiring algorithms filter out female applicants because past data showed that men were more likely to get hired. This is the paradox of modern science. We assume that data is neutral, but data is just past written in numbers. Misogyny in science is both a historical burden and a present reality. It is important to question the fallibility of scientific consensus. What is considered truth today may be debunked tomorrow. Scientific progress operates within paradigms, frameworks that shape how research questions are formulated and which findings are deemed credible. These paradigms are not free from cultural, political, and institutional biases. A major epistemological flaw in scientism, the belief that science is the supreme source of knowledge, is the assumption that scientific validity equates to moral correctness. In the past, scientific studies on sex differences were used to argue against women's education and professional participation. Western science has often dismissed indigenous knowledge systems, perpetuating cultural imperialism. If science alone dictated moral decisions, historical atrocities committed under the guise of scientific progress would have never been challenged. To avoid the pitfalls of scientific absolutism, we must integrate history, philosophy, ethics, and sociology into our understanding of scientific inquiry. All knowledge, including scientific knowledge, is entangled with power structures. So science must remain falsifiable, never to be treated as absolute truth.